Good evening, everyone. My name is Mansour Kazaruni with Page & Steele IVI Group Architects. I am the co-chair of the ULI's program committee, along with Mark Kindrachuk of Intermarket. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out on this cold, wet evening and attending this evening's fireside chat with Mayor Hazel McCallion. At the outset, I'd like to thank our sponsors, our event sponsor, Bird Construction, Daniels, FMC Law, Cadillac Fairview, Fram Group. Thank you all very much for your generous support. Background on the Fireside Chat event. This is actually our 5th Fireside Chat event, and these discussions have in the past given us great insight into the illustrious careers of some very distinguished individuals. We've had Ned Goodman here in the past speaking with Michael Cooper, John Love speaking with Blake Hutchison, Eddie Sunshine and Fred Wax, Peter Sharp last year interviewed by John O'Brien. So this is our 5th event. Background on the ULI. ULI is a not-for-profit education and research institute whose mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating sustainable, thriving, living communities worldwide. Tonight's agenda, we will have a question and answer session at 7 p.m. following the discussion tonight, and we hope to wrap up no later than 7:30. We encourage you to submit questions for the Q&A discussion through Twitter. The address will come up on the screen, the Twitter, or by email. You can email toronto@uli.org, and we'll be receiving your questions, and they will be read out by one of our volunteers. A quick background on Mayor Hazel McCallion, born on the Gaspé Coast in what she described earlier this evening as a little town. Mayor McCallion has committed more than 40 years of service to the residents of Mississauga. She's been the mayor since 1978 and is currently in her 11th term. Her leadership and accomplishments on the local, provincial, national, and international stage are far too many to list tonight, but we hope to hear about some of them very shortly. Without further ado, I will introduce Jennifer Keesmaat, who's joining her on stage, who is the recently appointed Chief Planner for the City of Toronto. And thank you, Jennifer, for agreeing to interview Mayor McCallion tonight. And without further ado, I present to you Mayor Hazel McCallion and Jennifer Keesmaat.
Well, I must say that this is one of those events that I'm quite confident only comes around for me once in a lifetime. And when I received the invitation from ULI, I said, sorry, could you come by again? What was that invitation? I am absolutely honored to be here today with you, Mayor Hazel, to have this conversation, to learn from your experience and your insights in so many years in public service. What I'd like to do is start, not completely at the beginning, but start at the beginning of your political life, your career in politics. And we know politics is, in fact, a difficult life in many ways, a very rewarding life in many ways. And my first big question is, back in the early 70s when you made this decision, what inspired you to choose political life?
Okay, well, I retired from the private sector. I worked for Canadian Kellogg that did a lot of engineering in the petrochemical field. We built a lot of great plants. We built the Palmer plant. That's when I was transferred from Montreal to Toronto, set up the office to build the world's first synthetic rubber plant at Saanich, Palmer, during the war, because the natural rubber source had been cut off by the enemy, and so the Canadian government decided. And we also was the company that devised the process to take oils out of the tar sands, Fort McMurray. So I worked for a very exciting company. And I decided to retire after being with them for 20-some years. And I got very much involved in the town of Streetsville as president of the Streetsville District Chamber of Commerce. And then the mayor of the town of Streetsville at the time asked me to join the planning board. That's when planning boards had some authority. And so I joined the planning board. Next thing, I'm chairman of it. And then I could see where the town council was made up of a bunch of people, all men, by the way, and that wasn't a good example. And as a result, I could see that I had an architect on the planning board, and we could see that the decisions by the council was, how do you get the taxes in? So I was encouraged to run for office. First time I ran, I was defeated. It was a one-year term then. And the gentleman who was successful, the deputy Reeve at the time, he was the one that went around and decided where all the water lines and sewer lines, but no plans were kept of where they were, but that was no minor detail. And so I didn't know where the water lines were, the sewer lines, so why should I? Next year, because a one-year term, can you imagine, one-year term? Next year I ran, and I won. And then the Reeve resigned for business purposes, and the council appointed me Reeve. Then in 1970 I ran for mayor of Streetsville, and was mayor till the provincial government decided to bring around regional government. So we were concerned as a planning board that the decision makers at the council level, they didn't agree with good planning. They just wanted to put something anywhere to get tax revenue. So it was quite an opposition. First thing I did when I became mayor was hire an engineer to see if we could find out where the water lines and sewer lines were. It was kind of important. So I put Mrs. Streetsville on a debt-free basis. In fact, we fought regional government, by the way. Streetsville wanted to expand and take over part of Mississauga. And that Mr. Davis decided that wasn't the way to go. So as a result, regional government came along. But I remember well that when we became a part of the city of Mississauga, the town of Mississauga didn't even have an aerial fire ladder, a fire truck with an aerial ladder on, because we had 2 apartment buildings in Streetsville. First thing that happened when we became part of the city, they stole our ladder and put it down to Cooksville, where it was all a high-rise. That disturbed the people more than anything.
So this is interesting. You started out 19 years in the private sector, decided to retire, and then your great life work began in many ways. In 68. And it was planning that was a key driver for you.
Planning was the basis on which I got into politics.
Interesting. And you began to hire professionals, and you've built up a great professional entity at the city, and there's great respect for the bureaucracy
quite honestly,
you
when
built.
we became a part of the city of Mississauga, we really took it over. The town of Streetsville. Is that right, Barry? He knows. Barry Lyons was working with Markware then, right? Remember Erin Mills Parkway? They wanted to put the road through Streetsville. I said, no way, you're going around it. That's why we have Erin Mills Parkway, right?
So in those beginning days, it was a very small place. It was easy to be very hands-on. How would you characterize your leadership? Are you, do you roll up your sleeves? Are you working really closely with the bureaucracy? Do you kind of empower people and set them free? What's your approach? How have you created that bureaucracy that you have?
Well, when regional government was formed in 1978, in which they put Streetsville, Port Credit, and the town of Mississauga together, and Brampton, I sat for 2 years as the Streetsville representative on the city council, and I was being put in a negative position. I was always complaining because the town of Mississauga was not well managed, and they had no policies, etc. And my expertise in the private sector was policy. Setting policy is to get we'd be awarded a contract to build, for instance, Petrofina, Montreal, and you had to get organized very quickly to get it done. You had policy and procedures, etc. So that was my expertise in the private sector, getting the job done.
So you walk in the door, you've got a lot of fixing to do. Where did you start?
That's right. So in 1978, I decided that I'm not going to sit here and be negative, because I think it affects your whole body. Mm-hmm. I mean, you become negative in dealing with your family and everything. So I said, I'm either going to go up or go out. The developers put up $60,000 against me. He said, ever let that wild woman in. It'll ruin development in Mississauga. Bruce McLaughlin, who is one of the largest developers in Mississauga, he put a lot of money up against me. Became one of my best friends. So, Barry, you know that. In fact, I'm sure your developers put a lot of money up against me, too. But I only had $12,000, and my opposition had $60,000. But I won. And
So you had this moment, and you said, not going to do that politics of negativity. I'm going to build something up instead of tearing something down.
I ran on a program of planning for people, to providing a community where you serve people, because I don't know what else we have to do other than serve people and businesses, etc. I have never promised to cut taxes, I can tell you. In fact, I often tell people your taxes are going up. And I get an applause sometimes, which I've never figured out. So I ran on planning for people, and that development must pay its way. And we took into the city of Mississauga a development levy of $50 per house. That was what Streetsville charged. Not legal, but we did it. And that was a hydro charge.
So I was going to get here later, but this leads very nicely into the conversation we're having on the regional scale right now about how we pay for our transportation infrastructure, how we pay for transit. We've got a pretty good debate going on right now about this conversation, what we're willing to pay for, what we're not willing to pay for. Can you weigh in on that conversation about regional planning and some kind of a regional mechanism or tool for transportation, in particular transit infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, one of the greatest faults, as I look back, one of the greatest things that we did not do well, and no municipality has done it well, transportation should have been the basis of all planning decisions, of all development. And when you look back into the GTA, why are we in this traffic congestion? Transportation is dealt with, but land use, when you determine the land use, transportation is one of the things should be the basis of the land use decision. And it has never been, and it still isn't.
We've absolutely made that mistake on a regional scale. Yeah. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Well, we made it locally and we made it regionally. You know, when you look at what has happened, we just haven't made transportation a priority.
Well, and one of the challenges is now we're trying to fix something that's really tricky to fix in retrospect. So we're talking about big dollars, $34 billion for a regional plan, but we still really don't have the right kind of land use to support great movement on the region.
Yeah. You know, the provincial government has never allowed us to. I used to chair the mayors and chairs of the Greater Toronto Area for 10 years, getting us together to try to look, because we are an economic unit, to try to look at how we could work together This was voluntary. Then the province got the smart idea to bring in the Greater Toronto Services Board. So we had to disband our voluntary effort. It lasted for a few years and was defeated. Then they brought in the transportation plan. We're going to put all the transportation together. Until the province, and I've told the Premier this often, until you make Metrolinx responsible for land use in the GTA, it's not going to be successful. Because here we are in the GTA approving development without the necessary transportation needs of the GTA being dealt with.
Well, couldn't it be that we kind of have a cascading effect where we have a regional transportation plan and we ensure that there's alignment with our local planning mechanisms? The concern I have about weaving those two things together is that you would get crushed under the magnitude and the weight of the task. Like even just as the chief planner in Toronto, we're pretty crushed under the weight of the magnitude of the growth that we see just in the city of Toronto. If that was taken out to a regional entity, gargantuan task.
Yeah, but let me tell you, you're building, development in the downtown of Toronto is just booming. Where's the transportation plan?
Well, that's what we're trying to develop right now.
It's absent.
It's 20 years late. It should have happened.
No, it's not only 20 years late, but every day you're adding to the transportation problem. And we are too. Not just Toronto, we are too. You know we have gridlock, but it hasn't stopped the development.
It's true, but part of our planning framework in Toronto, a big part of it, is about moving less. And moving less is about putting people into environments where they can choose to walk and take transit. So directing our growth to the downtown, we're seeing that. People in the downtown own less cars.
And politicians are just as guilty, by the way. But you forget that there's a movement of goods.
Absolutely.
You talk about the movement of people, and if a citizen calls one of my councillors, they turn cartwheels to fix the hole in the road, etc. They don't look at businesses. And if we don't move, if we have a lot of logistic companies in the GTA, and especially in Mississauga, if they can't move their products, our economic base is going to be seriously affected in the GTA.
Well, absolutely.
And all you planners think about, and all the politicians think about, is people. And the politicians are just as guilty, not just the planners.
Well, part of what we're trying to do...
Now I got the...
Part of what we're trying to do is to free up the roads for goods movement. A person can choose to leave their car and get on transit, can choose to live in an environment where they can walk to work, but a truck moving food, moving staplers or binders or whatever it might be, must use the roads. So if we can move people to use different forms, we can free up our road infrastructure for goods movement.
Good luck. Good luck.
I'll take it, because we're going to need it.
Transportation, and we're all guilty, I'm just as guilty as anybody else, it has not been the basis of land use planning. And that's why we're in the mess we're in.
It's absolutely true, and I think that's why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation at the regional level right now and trying to change that.
Yeah. We have two choices. Don't have three, just two. One is to do nothing and just let the crisis, and it's not, some people doesn't think it's a crisis. In my opinion, congestion in the GTA is a crisis. And people are going to only wake up, the politicians and the planners, and those that own property, when the economic base is affected. And it's being affected
now.
Right now. Can in major degree.
So let's go back to governance for a minute. You mentioned the Greater Toronto Services Board had a relatively short, short shelf life. Yeah. It strikes me that we've really struggled to figure out our governance model. We're constantly going through all this change.
Let me give you an example. What really bothers me, Metrolinx was delayed for 2 years. Do you know why? Because the City of Toronto would did not want, they wanted control of the vote at Metrolinx. And so finally, the Premier had the backbone to move ahead and set us up, put a bunch of politicians on it, including myself. And one day he called me down to Queen's Park and said, I'm thinking of eliminating the politicians. I said, well, you've really wakened up to the solution. Get rid of the politicians on Metrolinx and set up independent people to look at. David Miller held up Metrolinx for 2 years from being formed because he wanted the majority of the vote, and the province wouldn't give it to him.
So this is interesting because this is one of the challenges I think you can see at a local level in many municipalities. Possibly yours is accepted, but definitely in the City of Toronto. People back into their corners. They have a certain perspective and a certain interest, and this is a really good example. You know, the City of Toronto jockeying for its interest, other areas jockeying for their interest. And it strikes me that frequently our inability to move forward is because everyone's backed into a corner and no one's coming out of their corner. And I'd love to hear from you, in your experience, how have you been able to get people out of their corners, to get people to collaborate, to get ideas moving forward?
Well, I've been working for years to try to get the GTA working together. And the biggest problem is the City of Toronto.
There's no way I can win this one. It's not happening.
You folks in Toronto think you're God. And you know, you've made a mess of a lot of things. And you haven't seen the light that Toronto is the center of the Greater Toronto Area. We set up the Greater Toronto Marketing Alliance to promote and sell the Greater Toronto Area internationally. And all the 905 regions put in their money and put in their staff and set to work on it. Where was Toronto? They set up their own.
So here Toronto is a big problem. Have you ever considered running for mayor in the City of Toronto?
I'll be glad. I'll tell you, if I was 40 years younger, I would. Because the City of Toronto, what happens in Toronto affects us.
Absolutely.
Seriously. And affects all the regions around. And if we could only get, like I had a meeting of the large German mayors. I'm chairman of the large German mayors of Ontario. And we meet and we're really doing a great job in trying to find sustainable funding and create jobs, etc. Toronto is never at the table. How can you put together the Greater Toronto Area unless we have Toronto at the table?
Well, is that kind of a situation like the big kid on the playground that's kind of the bully that, you know, isn't going to take Toronto? Is that the problem?
No, it's not their bullying.
Because the interest is shared. It's a shared interest.
They just think that if it's Toronto, look at what the Toronto Board of Trade did. Let me talk about that. All of a sudden, out of a clear blue sky with no consultation with any boards of trade in the GTA or the Chambers of Commerce, they decided they're going to become the Toronto Region Board of Trade. That's the attitude of Toronto. When Toronto realizes that they're only a part of the Greater Toronto Area, and that the areas around are growing up very rapidly, that they have a major role to play. Have a major role. I wish I was mayor of Toronto. You know, they could be a leader. They could be a shining leader. Instead, the mayor of Mississauga is doing most of the work of trying to put the Greater Toronto Area together. Well, you know, I'm only a little Gaspesian. You know, until somebody wakes up to the fact that we have to work together.
Well, you could argue that, you know, if you spun it the other way, the change in name for the Board of Trade was about recognizing the regional shared interest.
It definitely. But remember that the Toronto Board of Trade doesn't represent the entire GTA.
So there's a lot of chambers of commerce around the region that are pretty
In fact, it was the Board of Trade of Mississauga and the Board of Trade of Brampton and the Chambers of Commerce that put together the Greater Toronto Marketing Alliance. We got them all together and said, and the private sector came on board and helped us. George Feilheller, who is well known in the Toronto area, a great guy, was the first honorary president of the Greater Toronto Marketing Alliance.
So here you are, you've had this great influence at a regional level over many years. Have you ever considered political office at the provincial level? Has that been a glimmer in your eye at any point? Or is it now?
That which?
Provincial leadership.
Me?
Yes, you.
I wouldn't be caught dead. I wouldn't be caught dead in either the federal or provincial government.
And why is that?
I wouldn't be caught dead.
Is it too difficult?
I've turned down I even had invitation from the Conservative Party when they wanted me to be the leader of the Liberal Party in Ontario before David Peterson took over. They approached me, were prepared to put up all the money for me to run as leader of the Liberal Party. I said, thank you very much. I've got better things to do. And what more satisfaction can anybody get than I can get from taking a municipality from 260,000, growing it to 750,000, with an economic base second to none.
So tell me,
what would you do all you would do at the provincial government is I would be a backbencher, no question about it, because I'd be crossing the floor, supporting. If the opposition came up with good legislation, I'd put my hand up and vote for it. And then you'd be kicked out of the party. Come on.
See, you're a perfect model of someone who comes out of the corner and follows the good idea. And I think that's what we need more of in politics, following the good idea as opposed to the ideology.
You see, at the local level, you can do things. You can do things. As an MP or a backbencher, what decision power have you got? In Ottawa, it's the Prime Minister makes all the decisions. In Queen's Park, it's the Premier.
So let's talk a little bit about the relationship between your private life and your political life. And what I'm curious about are the sacrifices that you undoubtedly have had to make to have this very, very public life.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I have a family that has supported me. I had a wonderful husband that was so supportive as I was mayor of Streetsville and the family, etc. It is tough. You got to manage it. There's no question about it. You can't get up in the morning and not know what you're going to do. You have your house to look after, you have your family to look after, and then you have to get to the office, do your job. So it's not easy. I'll tell you what I am concerned about. I think the time has come that with all the controls that are being placed on politicians, that very few are going to offer themselves for office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and from my perspective, it's pretty thankless.
I have used my influence for the last 35 years to build a city. And after the public inquiry that was called by our famous person, you all know her, the judge said, well, you used your influence. I use my influence every day as mayor.
That's the whole point.
Oh, now you got to check with an integrity commissioner to find out if you should use your influence. It's not going to encourage people to go on and do the job, get the job done. And, I don't know. Look at what Rob Ford has gone through. Whether, conflict of interest. I declared a conflict of interest on the convention center in the city core. Every time it came to a committee of council, I declared it. The judge said, yes, that I did. But because I tried to get owners to sell the land to the company that my son was involved in, before it ever came to council, that's a conflict. Well, how in the world could we get a convention center if the land isn't sold to somebody to build it? I don't know. Secondly, the condition I laid down for the purchase of the land was the hotel had to be built first because the land had a lot of condominiums. And I know developers well. They always tell them, we'll build the economic, if you give us permission to do the residential, what gets built first? Residential. And the economic portion of it is that. So the condition I laid down that the hotel had to be built canned the deal. Isn't that interesting?
So let's come back to this idea of who's going to run for office.
Who?
Who's going to run for
Well,
office?
first of all,
in this kind of a context.
I said to a staff member today, I think the person who should run for office should be on welfare. She said, Madam Mayor, they got a conflict. Own nothing, have no family, because if your family works for somebody, and if somebody can find out that they are connected with something that had the business to do with the city, charged with conflict.
So in 2013, is public life becoming too difficult?
Not for me.
You've mastered it. That's
No,
clear.
Not for me. But I can see difficulty down the road for those that run for office.
So
Serious
just a quick comparison. When you started, the kind of scrutiny that existed then and what exists today, how does that affect your day-to-day activities?
It affect what?
How does it affect your day-to-day activities? The kind of scrutiny that existed 35 years ago, and we know it's changed. There's a lot more media today. How has it changed? Has it made you more cautious? Has it made you more hesitant? Or do you just say, forget it, I'm doing what I'm doing?
I'm doing what I'm doing. I only have 2 more years to do it, and I'm going to do it. I'm not going to change at all.
So if there are some people in the room who aspire to public life, who might be concerned about this context
well, they have
you've
to
created.
be prepared. If they're going to go into public life, they have to be prepared. For instance, you know, some newspapers are what I call character assassination rags. And you can name the ones in Toronto. They're out to assassinate the you know, I remember the picture, and I don't know how many of you, I'll never forget it. Remember Chrétien and his wife adopted a boy, right? I didn't know if you knew that. And the son at 45, the adopted son, committed some type of infraction and was charged. Chrétien and his son was on the front page of the Globe and Mail. Yeah. Any other son would have done it? Well, that's another thing. But because it was his son, front page, that's the type of things that the press is portraying of people that are in office. Anybody else's son, it wouldn't be on the front page. It wouldn't be in the press at all, maybe.
So there's an issue here. The media sees its role, the third eye, as holding political leaders accountable, and yet that very accountability is constraining good people from being willing to go into public life.
I say to the press, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. They don't like that.
Well, and I think...
And let me give you, I listened the other night to the story on Mike Duffy, a senator. And the guy that interviewed him is a press reporter. And he said to Mike Duffy, how many years did you serve checking up on politicians doing the wrong thing? Think about it.
So here I am. I've just started my life as a public servant, as a chief planner in Toronto.
Yeah.
Only five months that I've been doing it.
Where were you before that?
I was like you. I was in the private sector. I was a private consultant. So I've made a big leap in terms of trying to figure out, as one counselor said to me, you've got to learn to talk like a bureaucrat. But I think it's precisely because I don't talk like a bureaucrat that I have the greatest potential of being effective. But I want to tell you a little story because in a moment with a lack of discretion, I tweeted a tweet several months ago that I should not have tweeted. It upset some people. And I sent out this tweet. It was at City Council. And a City Councillor came up to me and said, people are upset about what you tweeted. And I said, oh, it was not my intent to upset anyone. I'll delete it. So I deleted it. So the tweet was there for 7 minutes. The newspaper ran a story The newspaper ran a story, and in the newspaper article, I said my intent was not to offend anyone. That was absolutely not my intent. The moment I discovered I had offended, I removed the tweet. It's like a conversation, and I say something, and someone says, you're absolutely wrong, and I say, oh, so let me get it right then. It was like a clarification. That incident where that tweet was live for 7 minutes gets repeated again and again and again in every newspaper article. It's inescapable. And it's,
well, you're learning quickly.
I'm learning the hard way. I'm learning the hard way. And a few people have said to me, you've really got to be more careful and think more carefully. Well, I'm almost petrified before I say anything because I've become so hyper-conscious of the way my words can be misconstrued.
I got some good advice just about 2 weeks ago. I meet with a group in Streetsville in a little coffee shop. This guy's a retired firefighter. He said to me, he said, you know, Madam Mayor, I think the future is do nothing in politics. And we have some counselors. And we have, I'm sure there's counselors all throughout the province that sit and do nothing. Pretty hard to criticize them except they do nothing.
Well, and I think that's the great risk to public life.
Exactly.
It's a great risk to public life.
And the staff is going through the same thing.
Absolutely.
Not like you experience.
Absolutely.
Now, what is so important about that tweet? But the newspapers just love to grab it and emphasize and blow it out of complete proportion.
Well, and when I started at the City of Toronto and I met with all of my staff and was trying to get a sense of the landscape at the city, one of the things that I heard again and again is that staff had retreated in their roles, and I discovered all these brilliant, passionate people who were excited about city building, many of whom said they had retreated, almost like turtling, because any time they came out, they got their neck lopped off. And so there was this retreating. And I think the same thing happens for public servants as it does for public politicians.
Well, it's happening with public service, but more so for politicians.
Yes.
Public service has been escaping it to a certain degree, but it's going to come out. Talk to our city manager. I think she's in
here.
The audience. You know.
So what's the solution?
What's the solution?
What's the solution? How do we move forward? How do we invigorate public life in this kind of a climate?
Going to be very, very difficult. Very, very difficult as I see it. I don't envy the role of future politicians. I think it's they're going to have to be so careful. You know, there's a lot of risk in being a politician. You have to take risks. And but today we're just being lowered down to the point where you really, if you want to be a success, do nothing. Don't make any decisions. If you don't make decisions, they can't criticize you, except to say you didn't make a decision. They can't criticize you because you helped this person, or you helped that person, or you did this.
So what do you feel is your boldest decision? You know, what are some of your boldest decisions?
Oh,
you know, the moments where you really went out on a limb.
Well, one of the boldest decisions was during the derailment in 1979. I was sort of a young mayor then. And one of the boldest decisions was to phone Ottawa and tell them to get somebody down here without a guy with a pair of boots wandering around and doing nothing. And the Minister of Transport of that, who now is out in Alberta, will never forget that. And it was a bold decision because we were going nowhere on this train derailment with a chlorine tank with a big hole in it and escaping into the air, etc. And it was a bold decision. I took the bull by the horns and phoned Ottawa. So immediately they sent a crew down by plane to help us with the decision that we had to make on the derailment. That was a rude awakening. I was only elected in 1978 and had to handle a major disaster. Had to evacuate 250,000 people. It was the largest evacuation in North America at the time. So that threw me into decision-making pretty quickly.
So part of why that was successful was because you had the networks to call up the right people to make that happen. Was that a part of it?
The province was with us, but the federal government had to get with us, and they sent down a guy. I remember wandering around and doing nothing. So I got to the Minister of Transportation at the time and said to him, "You got to get staff down here. You got to get qualified people down here." He's never forgotten me for it because he said, "I'll never forget the phone call you made." I was pretty upset because we had a lot of people out of the city.
So you've always seemed at the right moment to be able to get the right ear of whether it's a provincial leader or a federal leader. How have you done that? How have you been able to kind of work across political boundaries and work across jurisdictions?
Well, my politics is basically conservative with a liberal point of view, great social conscience, and looking for a heck of a lot of reform in government.
Is there a party name we can put on that?
I take them all on. I really don't. Right now, I just can't believe that Horvath and Tim Hudak is asking for a public inquiry that all it will do is put a lot of money in lawyers' pockets. What happened on the gas plant is quite simple. OPA approved that Loreland project 14 years ago, never consulted with the city, landed it in the midst of a residential area, etc. And I've been working with the government all those years to try to find out a way around of canceling that contract. The province made a terrible decision by not canceling before there was a hole in the ground, right?
They started the work.
Yeah, start the work. And they canceled it. Anybody, I don't know who would deny that they canceled it to save 4 positions. And if you cancel a contract, you better be prepared to pick up the tab. And you don't know what it is because you don't know how many lawsuits are involved, etc. What more does Tim Hudak and Horvath want to know about? I don't know. Do you? But a public inquiry, the only reason for a public inquiry is character assassination of those that made the decision at a very high cost to the taxpayers.
So
that's what the inquiry in Mississauga was all about.
So isn't this the catch-22 around the earlier conversation we were having around holding public servants accountable? It used to be that a public servant was in fact an esteemed position. And today we tend to go after our public servants, and this is actually a good example of that.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, they're out to find out who sent a memo, etc. It was a very bad decision to cancel it when it was half up. And half up is more costly than canceling it before it started. Because they got to tear it down, they got to replace it, etc. Very, very bad decision. But what more do we need to know? It was a bad decision.
So tell me, what has been the toughest challenge that you've faced? What has been the most difficult? Is it weekend meetings?
The most difficult was I fought regional government, and I still believe that regional government in the region appeal is wrong. It's duplication second to none. It's costing the taxpayers a lot of money, and it just causes another big administration. We are the 6th largest city in Canada. Do we need to be in a region? Yes, we need to be in the region. I would prefer to be a part of the region of the Greater Toronto Area as a whole. Here we have Caledon, a rural area, that if they tried to fix all their bridges, it would bankrupt them. So they're in the region so that Mississauga, especially for all these years, has been financing the region. Brampton is coming along now. And by the way, Brampton now is interested in getting out of the region. The time we wanted to get out of it, they weren't interested.
So the regional model
government is unnecessary. It's another administration. So why do we need 2 administrations?
But it sounds like you're suggesting that really the region makes sense, but it needs to actually be the Greater Toronto Hamilton region.
Exactly. No, leave Hamilton out of that.
Leave Hamilton out.
Janice was at our meeting on Thursday, and the mayor of Brampton, the mayor of Hamilton says he has no gridlock. And my comment was, I've never figured out how you ever got into the GTA in the first place.
You have to have gridlock to be a part of the club?
You know, Hamilton should not be in the GTA. If you're going to create, it should be the Golden Horseshoe. If you really want a region, is the Golden Horseshoe. But Hamilton it's an appendage to the GTA. They may have appendix problems. I don't know.
So this is interesting because there's a variety of different ways of slicing the governance of the region, and the province has moved around a lot in how they do that.
Oh, boy.
Now we have
That's an understatement.
Now we have Metrolinx. Where should that conversation be happening? Where is it? A provincial conversation? Is it a collaboration?
Well,
where do we have that discourse?
My greatest hope in Metrolinx, and to date I haven't been disappointed, and I hope I won't be, that the decision, there's not a lot of money. And I'm concerned about the stand of some politicians that everything has to be underground. You know what? If we had lots of money, let's put it all underground. The point is we don't have the money. So where we can do light rail transit, we should do light rail transit if we're concerned about moving people and goods, because it's the faster way to get to the end. The point is that the decisions or recommendations of Metrolinx has got to be based on need, not politics, because decisions in the past have been based on politics. You know, where did the subway go? Nowhere. The one that was built for $900,000, close to $1 billion, goes nowhere. It was politics. Two politicians, local and provincial, getting together. So Metrolinx, and they better not veer from it, because if they do, I'm ready to really go after them. Based on priority. If that priority is a project in Toronto, even though I have one in Mississauga, that's where the money should go. If it's going to make the greatest contribution to the impact, to the gridlock in the GTA. We've got to get away from these political decisions and spend the money, the little we have, on priority.
So your leadership in Mississauga has been characterized by a clear vision, strong municipal leadership. What's the role of ongoing public consultation? What's the role of bringing people into decision-making?
I say to the people of Mississauga, if we ever left the planning of Mississauga up to them, Mississauga would be a hell of a mess. You know, you get public input, and it's not all bad. And it's very essential that you consult with the public. But remember, you're the decision maker. And it's up to you to take the staff professional recommendations. And my staff knows that they better come forward with professional. I don't want them to play politics, and they don't. They come forward with their best recommendation and not cater to the mayor or members of council. And if we say no, even though they're right, and then it's our responsibility, not theirs. They've done their job. So, in my opinion, we've got to have staff in all the municipalities that are professional and will give us their professional advice. That is extremely essential. And not try to play politics or play to councillors or the mayor.
Well, there's some models across the country. Vancouver's a really strong example where there's a very strong separation between the professional staff and the political staff. Toronto is the opposite. Toronto, it's like this. It's completely entwined. Mississauga, it sounds like it's much more separate.
Well, where's all the staff here today? Is that right? They are asked to give us their best professional advice. They're not always right, by the way.
Of course not. And the politicians are sometimes right.
But always don't feel badly because we make a decision that is not in line with their recommendation, but then the responsibility then transfers from them up to us. And we're accountable. They're not. In other words, every 4 years we come up for election. So the people will judge us on the decisions we made.
So let's talk a little bit about the shape of the city, the way the city's been built out. Mississauga is a suburban municipality. You now, through your strategic plan, are pursuing the Huron-Ontario corridor, focusing on creating a more vibrant downtown. Could you talk a little bit about that shift that's going on in the city right now?
Well, our biggest problem is that, I don't know of any city around the world, except maybe in Australia, that started from a hayfield with a core. Because most cities have spread from a core, no matter how minor it was. Maybe it was a railway stop, right? And spreads from there. We started in a hayfield just a few years ago. Square one. I was mayor of Streetsville at the time, invited to the turning of the sod of Square One in a hayfield. When I was elected mayor in 1978, I sat in my office and cows and horses grazed across the field where the Marilyn Monroe building is now. That's not many years ago.
It's not. And the trajectory of the life of cities.
Yeah. So we've had
Mississauga's a baby
tough
city.
Struggle to build a city and to get in the city core, the things that we want. We have a vision. There's no question about it. The staff has come up with the help of consultants with a good vision. But we don't own any land. Like the Hershey Center should have been in the city core. But nobody would take up the challenge to put the Hershey Center in the city core. When the only reason Sheridan College is there is because we bought the land that was supposed to be for the convention center. We bought the land and leased it to Sheridan College. So, I don't know, we just haven't been able to build. I remember that one plan for the city core, we had a vision of 12 million square feet of office space in the city core. We have very little office space in the city core. So we've got a challenge that most cities don't have.
Well, and one of those challenges is that cities are often a product of their time, and there have been different trends in urban planning, and Mississauga is a product of a moment in time in urban planning that was focused on single-family dwellings. It's a product of its time. I'm wondering if you can comment on what it means for the city moving forward, given that it has that
Well, I'm known as the Queen of Sprawl. That's what the papers call me. I don't know. Sprawl occurs in all cities. In fact, I believe Don Mills is sprawl. Right? That was a pretty big development in Toronto. So we're not the only one that has sprawl, but it's true. When Markburg came out and Cadillac Fairview, etc., that's what the people wanted. That's what the market called for, was single-family homes. And to convert it to high density has not been easy, because people don't like density. And yet, we've done it. Our density, if Ed is here, aren't we second in the GTA with density next to Toronto? Yeah.
So it's interesting.
We're trying to convert to density, but I'll tell you, it's not an easy job.
Well, you have to fight with the landscape and fight with the form that you have, because that form was not designed to be high density. So it's really tricky to adapt it and turn it to something else. But I think it can be done. It can be adapted. One of the things we're seeing in the City of Toronto is in some of our suburban neighborhoods, particularly on the periphery of the city, is that there's a lot of invisible density, in as much as a lot of these single-family homes actually have many, many people living in them.
Oh, we have that in Mississauga. I remember in one election, in one residential unit you remember when they used to go around and make up the voters list? The government used to do it. I remember in one residence in Malton, there were 22 people living in the house. As the councillor said, the beds never got cold.
But you've got a pretty high density, and in some ways, if a lot of those people have a car because it's the best way to move. That's part of the movement problem.
We estimate we have 30,000 illegal apartments in Mississauga.
Wow.
And the only way we ever know about them is people complaining, and then we investigate it. And unless we get permission to enter, which we don't have, except going to court, the province doesn't give our fire department the right to enter without permission.
In Vancouver, there's a movement that it's a bit unfortunately named. It's called eco-density.
Yeah.
But the idea is around adding density in laneway homes and in coach houses and through additional units on the back of residential homes as a way of adding more density in suburban neighborhoods and in suburban areas. Is that the kind of idea that Mississauga might consider moving forward?
Yeah. Well, my concern is that we have spent, as I said the other night, we have spent a lot of money with the province insisting we have an official plan. The province has insisted we have secondary plans. And we've built our services based on that planning. Because you got to serve people and you got to serve businesses, but let's take people. So we build community centers and libraries, etc., based on that population that will be produced with all that very expensive planning. Now comes second units in residential homes. What does that do to our planning? Our community centers are loaded now. We add another 10 to 15, 20,000 people with second units. It throws our planning right out the window.
Well, if you had the cash lying around most of those community centers, you've got land. You could build them out and add more amenities.
Not in all cases.
Not in all cases.
No. You know, remember why Thatcher was defeated? She believed in a head tax. And the only solution to all this increased density that wasn't planned, is head tax, not property tax.
Well, I think people would argue you could have a gas tax.
And she got defeated, so I'm not suggesting it.
Right. That's why you've been here as long as you have.
You see, it's interesting. The province mandates all this, and they say every 5 years you have to look at your official plan, you have to bring it up to date. And then all of a sudden, out of a clear blue sky, they come in with legislation and says, oh, this is mandated, you got to do this. What does that do to all our planning process? We plan a library on servicing so many people within an area. I mean, we had criteria that for an indoor swimming pool, it was 50,000 people we would build one. Outdoor swimming pools was 25,000. Community center to accommodate so many people. But what does it do when all this density comes in, which is fine, better use of land, no question about it, and more people? So it throws your planning right out the window.
Well, wouldn't it be fair to say, though, if we look at the services and the amenity that you've been able to provide in Mississauga, in many ways, you've provided the Rolls-Royce version. You've got wonderful community centers. You've integrated your libraries with your community centers, which is a model across the country. Would it not be fair to assume that moving forward, that level of service is in fact going to go down? Like, I think about areas where we're adding a lot of density in the city of Toronto. You don't get the Rolls-Royce anymore. That model's gone.
Well, it's not really Rolls-Royce service, because our community centers now are overloaded because of the illegal apartments, for one thing. Secondly, with the densities that are occurring, that have occurred to date. Because many of those criteria that we used for planning was based on mainly single-family homes, right? Because that was the time of the day. So now we have to, replan based on this.
Are you surprised by the way Mississauga has become this wonderful magnet for new immigrants? Is that something that you would have envisioned 30 years ago?
No. They love Mississauga.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it comes back to these amenities, because having a great library, having access to a great school and a recreation center is a really important part of beginning
Well, Toronto
to
just
integrate.
declared themselves as a sanctuary for immigrants. We've been a sanctuary for years. We don't have to declare it. We're it.
What I'd like to do is shift the conversation a little bit and take some questions from the floor to give all of you an opportunity. This is what you need to be afraid of. But I think you can handle it. There's some microphones in the back corner. If anyone's interested in asking a question, you're more than welcome just to stand up and lined up behind the mic, and I will direct you and let you know. And I think we have a first question here. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to bring the microphone.
Oh, you're bringing the mic out. Okay, great. So just throw your hand up in the air if you have a question. And while we're waiting for some of you to get over your shyness, I'm very curious. What is your favorite spot in the city?
In Mississauga?
What is it? Yeah, your favorite spot in Mississauga.
My home.
Your house.
I got a beautiful backyard.
Wonderful. Okay, so after your home, where do you love to be? Don't say the office.
I have two spots: Riverwood area, the Riverwood Park, and the Lake Promenade Park on the credit.
So this is interesting that you've chosen parks, because Mississauga has a really amazing amount of parkland.
Yeah, we have 7,000 acres of parkland.
Which is, it's mind-boggling. When we talk about adding more density, you can't add a lot more density unless you have that park space. So you've got one of the key criteria that you need in order to add park space. In order to add density.
And we're developing our waterfront. Nobody knows about it, but it's fine. It's being preserved for people. We don't have high rises on the waterfront. Nothing below lakeshore can be more than 4 stories high.
Sir, go ahead. Stand up, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Rod Nail. It's a pleasure to be here, Madam Mayor. Thank you for doing this. My question is, in Europe, this goes back to transit-based planning. In Europe, they have been doing transit-based planning for years, for decades, centuries in some cases, where transit goes in first and they plan around it, Paris, London, et cetera. How is it that Toronto and Mississauga, for that matter, hasn't taken that example, and why is it we feel we have to reinvent the wheel? Why did we not learn from what Europe has been doing for centuries?
Well, I remember years ago that the transit system in Toronto was considered one of the best in North America. Americans used to come up and look at the transit system here. I was on the international, or the American Transit organization representing Canada for 1 year. And they used to, this is a number of years ago, they used to talk about the Toronto transit system. And so what has happened, I guess, is the transit system has been neglected. Now, I don't think it's the fault of the city. We started to build transit a number of years ago in Mississauga, public transit, and Toronto Transit. Along came Mr. Harris as Premier of the province and cut out all transit subsidy. We were given 75% of the capital cost of a bus. That got completely cut out, and we were given, I think Toronto got more subsidy than we got. But if I recall, it was 17.5% to 18% of the operating deficit of transit. That all got cut completely by the province. And I think the TTC, it was a setback to the TC. I know it was a setback to us. And we just had a small transit system, but it was a setback. 75% of the purchase of the bus. So, quite honestly, I think the vision of public transit in Toronto itself sort of got sidetracked.
I think that's true.
I think it is. It's the only explanation I have.
I was in Portland, Oregon a few years ago and meeting with some city staff there, and I mentioned that I was from Toronto, and they responded with glee about our transit system and said, in Portland, we have been trying to emulate and create a system like what you have in Toronto, where you integrate subway with light rail, with buses, and provide extensive coverage across the whole city. And it was such a shake to the head because we're so frustrated with the system in the city, and to realize that it, in fact, at one point in time was, of course, a system to emulate. And but we stagnated. We stagnated, and it all comes down to money. Because I can tell you there are many, many transit plans. The planning, and for the TTC, there are many expansion plans. The problem's not the plan. The problem is the money to invest in the framework.
There's no country, I don't know of any country in the world that the federal government doesn't plow millions and millions into transit. The federal government here doesn't do it. I used to come back. I used to be envious. I learned what was happening down there, and they would say, well, what does your federal government do? Nothing. Help us with transit. And
can you make a phone call about that?
I made a few phone calls. But, you know, the federal government, we've been asking for a transportation strategy for the country, not just for GTA. And the federal government is not moving on it. It's all ad hocery. They give us gas tax, not even fuel tax, by the way. They really pulled a smart one on us. They gave us gas tax. Fuel tax would be more money. So, you know, finally they decided to do that. But think of the years that we got nothing. And in the States, they plow billions into transit. The federal government.
Well, and the further challenge is that there's been a real immobilization at the planning level. I think we haven't been moving because there hasn't been any money. But even if the money arrived tomorrow for the downtown relief line, for example, an environmental assessment would need to be undertaken. We would be 10, 15 years away from making it happen because we've stagnated to such an extreme.
Well, we're over-regulated in this country. There's no question about it. I'd love to be a mayor in China. Decide today we're going to build a road. Decide today we're going to do the high-speed train
and it's
from
done.
Beijing to Shanghai. And in 2 years, it's done.
It's about
Here we got to go through. I always say we spend so much time and money finding out if we can do it that by the time we're finished that, we don't have the money to do it.
Or we've been fighting about how to do it by the time we get to the end. Do we have another question? Sorry.
I'll just stand up.
Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Bedford, and I had the pleasure of serving on the Metrolinx board with Hazel for the first term, and we got the plan done. But as we all know now, the question of the day is the funding. So I'm dying to ask Hazel. There's 4 campaigns underway right now to try and educate the public about all the options. One of them is the City of Toronto campaign, Fueling Congestion. Another one is the Metrolinx campaign. Another one is Civic Action. And there are many more people, that are involved in this exercise. And there's a whole range of funding tools that have been discussed. And you and I know many of them. Every one of them are controversial. They're road tolls, they're regional sales tax, they're regional parking levies. They're all tough decisions. And in the next 6 months, we have to bite the bullet on this. As most people here in this room know, Metrolinx has to submit the investment strategy recommendations to the Premier by June the 1st of this year. So I would like to know, in your best advice, Hazel, what kind of tools do you think make the most sense for us to generate the $2+ billion every year for the next 25 years to get the kind of transit that we all want?
Well, first of all, they've done all the research on the tools. So it's very important that we know what research has been done and how those tools have applied in other parts of the world. They've done a worldwide research on it. So for me to choose the tool, I would have to know what it would produce. I think it's going to be an extremely hard sell, it's going to have to happen. There's got to be tools, and it may be more than one tool. It may be a number of tools. And the public are not going to be happy. There's no question about it. So the decision makers are going to have to make a decision and get on with it. If you ask people that want their taxes to go up, I think it would be sold in a much easier way if the people knew it was dedicated, that the money they get would be dedicated and wouldn't go into the general funds of the province or the municipality. But it's not going to be an easy sell.
Do you
people
think
don't
we have
want taxes?
Do you think we have the political leadership to be that gutsy? We need some gutsy decision making.
But how can you combat? How can you combat the leader of the Conservative Party saying if he thinks that by us cutting costs at both the provincial level and local level that we can finance the $50 billion capital project? That's not possible. Yes, there can be money cut out, no question about it, and especially, by the way, in Toronto.
I would like to give you a little tour of my division. Where we don't get cookies and muffins like you do
well,
in
I think
Mississauga.
the mayor of Toronto has done a good. I think
We don't
the mayor of Toronto has done a good job of cutting the costs. There's no question about it. But when you have the leader of the Conservative Party saying, "Well, we don't know. We're going to reduce taxes," there's no such thing as reducing taxes. It's not a reality. That's putting your heads in the sands. It's interesting that he's saying that, but we at the local level raise taxes. I don't know. We do it every year. Every municipality. There's very few municipalities in this province that doesn't raise the property tax every
Well,
year.
and out west they're raising them 6-7%.
So there we have the situation, and in my opinion, it's going to be another tax or another couple of taxes to make it up. As I say, do nothing and live with the transit, with the gridlock, or do something and help pick up the tab for it. That's the only two choices we have. Yes, you can cut costs. There's no question about it. You can all do that. I think we do a fairly good job in Mississauga cutting costs and such. I think we do a very good job, if you really want to know. Our staff comes forward every year with millions, 2 or 3 billion cutting and cutting, finding new ways of doing things. We do that. There's always somewhere to cut costs, but it's not going to touch the capital costs. The capital cost, not the operating and maintenance.
Which is a whole
Capital
other
cost
piece.
is a one-shot deal. Operating and maintenance, and my position is that the province is going to have to fund the capital cost. And the property tax then can struggle with the maintenance and operation. Because no subsidy, no transit system is 100% user fee.
There's a great article that came out recently that argued that the great failing of municipal finance in North America is that we only planned for capital costs and didn't anticipate the demands of long-term infrastructure maintenance costs.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you know, municipalities for years ago, many years ago, their capital planning is year to year. But now most municipalities are in a 10-year phase. So there's big improvement.
Do we have another question from the floor over here? Gail, Penelope? Right here.
Oh, okay. So this question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What? Can I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, so this question comes via Twitter from Michael Fox. He asks, Jennifer, what are the key challenges you're currently facing? And Mayor McCallion, do you have any advice?
Oh,
What's that?
that's fantastic. So the question is, what are the challenges I'm currently facing, and what's your advice for my challenges? So I'll tell you some of the challenges that I'm facing.
Okay.
We've touched on them this evening. I've been talking about them. But the biggest challenge that I'm struggling with in my role is this inertia around being able to build consensus for an idea and then move forward and do it. Just do it. And this comes back to the notion of people backing into their corners and not being able to identify the shared interest and move forward. So the question I would have to you in terms of advice that I'm looking for as the Chief Planner in the City of Toronto, you've identified the problem that Toronto can be on the regional scale. What advice would you give me as a Chief Planner in trying to move forward some bold ideas around transit planning?
Well, first, oh gee, you really led me into something. First of all, what is lacking in Toronto is a corporate overview of the city by the politicians.
You mean like a vision?
Yeah.
A shared vision?
Shared vision. So that's your problem.
Mm-hmm. But that's a political problem.
We've been able to develop that. I'm absolutely amazed at the city of Mississauga, in which, as we sit at the planning committee and we're all there, as to the involvement of the councillors in other councillors' wards and commenting and questioning. To me, that is the only answer. You've got to have a council, and with, what have you got, 44?
44.
Well, you only need 25, so you get rid of all those others. I find that as I read the newspapers, mm-hmm. that the councillors they don't seem to have an overview of an overview of their decision making, that it's good for the city as a whole, rather than just their ward. And I don't know how you eliminate that. I don't see how you can.
Are you a believer in a ward structure versus a citywide structure? Do you believe pretty strongly in the ward system?
Yeah, I don't want to make a comment on that. I've heard a lot of debate about it. Our ward system works. Mm-hmm. That's all I can say. But it doesn't work in your area. Mm-hmm. So therefore, our ward system does work. I mean, we have councillors criticizing or commenting on what's happening in other wards. Mm-hmm. Like at a planning committee, there used to be an attitude, well, if the ward councillor says what they want, then that's what they want. That has disappeared in Mississauga. Very, very seldom does that come up anymore.
Well, in defense of the culture we have at the City of Toronto, one of the challenges we have is the volume. We're the second fastest growing city in the world. So the volume means that often it's necessary to defer, because there's just, we have wards with 120 development applications in one ward. So deferring to the ward councillor actually becomes a necessity, because it's just difficult given the volume. We have 4,000 applications a year.
Yeah, and you have the problem. I've never understood how the province overnight decided that all the municipalities in Toronto should be one. Mm-hmm. I haven't known of any company yet in the private sector that would take over 6 companies at one time. Mm-hmm. They usually take one over and meld it in. The province all of a sudden decided, as of January the 1st of a certain year, there would be amalgamation of all the municipalities. They created a chaos second to none.
That's absolutely true. And one of the things that's been most shocking to me arriving is to see how the whole city is still reeling from amalgamation. So let alone getting visionary, the city, just trying to administrate the volume of the city has been a gargantuan challenge. And then add on top of that the amount of growth that we've had. And it's very difficult to be having the proactive conversations we need to have, because it's just a matter of kind of making do. And then take an environment where we're continually decreasing the resources, because we've had many years of zero tax increase, which means as our city has been growing and our development applications have been growing, our resource has been decreasing because we're not even keeping up with inflation as a municipality. So it's like a perfect storm. You add all of that together, and then you wonder why there aren't people sitting around being visionary. In part, it's because it's just this unbelievable task. You know, harmonizing our zoning bylaw has been...
Oh, well, we
how do you do that?
Years. We have a zoning bylaw now for the entire city. You still don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
We might by the end of the month.
Secondly, the other thing you have to do, and I don't know whether the politician, your residential taxes are far too low, and your industrial office is far too high.
Mm.
So we're getting a lot of industrial, certainly office commercial, because your taxes are, I believe, unless they've come down a bit,
no, they're
used
high.
to be 3 times the cost of a square foot of office space in Toronto. Yeah. But our residential taxes are higher, and I do get that the odd time, saying, well, you know, in Toronto, I only paid $3,000 or something. Mississauga, we're paying $4,500. I said, yeah, but think of the wonderful services you're getting.
I was kind of hoping someone would clap when you said that. That would have been appropriate. We'll take one last question for the floor. We just have a minute or so left.
I wonder if you have any advice for many mayors or leaders that are where you were 30 years ago. It seems like we're confronting a situation that is, when you're saying that it's a perfect storm, everybody knows we're going to increase the population by 50% in the next 20 years in the extended GTA. But nevertheless, we're talking, and not doing a lot. You are a doer. So what would you recommend to the politicians? Because it can be such a magnificent opportunity to create a fantastic, vibrant, and healthy GTA, or it could be a horrible mess. We're going to grow by 50%. I mean, if we had a magic wand and we could do half of Toronto or half of Mississauga or half of any community, even the best half, we would do it even better. That is the magnificent opportunity that we have. But nevertheless, there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency around public transit, around parks and sidewalks and safe streets for the children and the older adults. So what would you recommend? What would you think are the key priorities for decision makers from the private sector, from the public sector, and for elected officials to make now in order to have a wonderful GTA in the next 20, 30 years?
Well, I don't believe in a large government for the GTA, because I think when government gets too big, it's not very effective. You lose control, for one thing. I remember when I was mayor of Streetsville, I used to sign the welfare checks. And some I held up, because I knew what they were doing they shouldn't have been doing. Now, you don't dare ask if somebody's on welfare. It's not permissible. So big government is not the answer. What I would like to see in the GTA is a coordinating body in the GTA, like we have with the Greater Toronto Marketing Alliance that looks after international promotion of economic development. It's only one aspect. But what we need is some structure that we, the politicians in the GTA, get together. There's nothing now. Absolutely nothing. It's all disappeared. Metrolinx is not it. Metrolinx is only dealing with, in fact, they're only dealing with transit. They're supposed to deal with transportation, but they're only dealing with transit. They're not dealing with roads. The MTO is still messing around with that in the roads, etc. So we lack coordination. There are those that believe we should have a government structure. I don't agree with a government structure. I think it's far too big. Look what's happened in Toronto with putting all those bodies together. It'll take, I would say it'll take another 10 to 15 years to sort that out, to get them working together, because as she has said. So it's coordination that's needed. And I hope somebody will put it together. And it needs the mayor of Toronto to lead it. So what are your hopes? I don't know. But that's my advice, a coordinating body. That we meet on a regular basis, as we were doing so well, even without Toronto, meeting and talking about the issues and making representation to the federal and provincial government, even though we weren't a formalized structure, but we were still doing it on a voluntary basis. Now we have nothing, absolutely nothing.
Mayor Hazel, the time has gone by in an absolute flash. It's been like a flash in the pan. I wish we had another hour or two. I'm going to turn over the floor to Leslie Wu, who's going to close our session.
So first of all, thank you very much to Jennifer and Your Worship. Let's give a little round of applause.
Been fun.
So I think we'll all agree it has been a remarkable evening to witness the commonality which is stretching, and Paul Bedford let me know it's 5 decades between Jennifer and Hazel, so it's quite a privilege to have this conversation. First of all, belated happy birthday, Your Worship.
Oh.
And I'd like to, in particular, thank the Mayor, first of all, for enlightening and sharing with us her origins as a planner for the people, to thank her for what she has sacrificed in public life and the portfolio that she has delivered through the city of Mississauga, to thank her for taking the risks that you have done and being a doer and not just doing nothing, and also for being what I classify as the modern woman. You describe yourself in terms of your politics as very multifaceted, and I think we would say that the citizenry of this region and Mississauga and the many cities here have this very complex understanding of who they are, and it's not so singular anymore. So you do, in fact, at 92, represent many of us. And in many respects, to thank you also as a resident of Toronto for being one of Toronto's greatest champions. And it is our loss that you don't want to run for mayor, but anyway. So without further ado, I really want to express our appreciation. I also want to thank the event sponsors, Bird Construction, Daniels, FMC Law, Cadillac Fairview, Fram Group. And I particularly want to thank the ULI Urban Land Institute Women's Leadership Initiative, of which I am a part, because we were particularly excited to have 2 significant women from this area to be part of the Fireside Chat. And our initiative at ULI is really focusing on celebrating the success of women in building a better Toronto. And what better 2 people we could have here to represent that. So thank you again. I have a couple of housekeeping announcements, if you don't mind. Just a reminder to everyone here that on March 12th, ULI Student Career event is taking place, and we have lots of openings still. And in April, for those of you that are interested, ULI is launching our 2013-2014 mentorship program. It's in its 5th year, and it's a great way to become involved with ULI and give back to your community. And on May 1st, we are hosting a program on density in the downtown and the changing Toronto skyline, which I think will be a lot of interest to many of you. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you to you all for taking time out this evening. I particularly want to thank my sisters from Metrolinx. We have quite a big showing tonight because of the interest in this issue, but also to everyone else. I think we can count this as a raging success. Thanks to Jennifer and Hazel. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thanks. Was it?
Good luck in your job.
Thank you so much. It's a very difficult one.